He was one of the most powerful millionaires in the city, cold, respected, feared. But behind the gates of his mansion lived a different story. A broken man, a silent house, and a little boy in a wheelchair who hadn't walked or laughed in months. After the accident, nothing was the same. His son refused to speak, refused to smile, and pushed away every nanny who'd tried to get close. 8 nannies in 2 months, all fired. No one could reach him. No one could stay until one woman showed up. She wasn't glamorous. She didn't ask questions. She didn't promise healing. She just listened. She stayed. And with small, quiet steps, she did what no one else could. She made the boy smile again. She made him stand again. And without even knowing it, she taught the millionaire how to live again. This is not just a story about a nanny. It's about how one woman with no magic and no fame walked into a broken home and changed everything. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Vincent Caldwell didn't always live like a ghost inside his own mansion. He used to be a man who filled every room with confidence, someone who made the world move with just a phone call. But that version of him disappeared 2 years ago when his son Oliver was in a car accident that changed everything. Since then, Vincent had built walls around himself, not just the physical ones in his enormous estate, but emotional ones, stronger and colder. The world still called him a billionaire, still watched him on business magazines and finance reports, but anyone who saw him now would barely recognize the man he once was. He rarely left the house, spoke only when necessary, and had turned his full attention to Oliver, not in the way a father hopes to, but more like someone always on the edge of helplessness, guilt, and frustration. Every attempt to bring normalcy back into their lives had failed. 8 nannies had come and gone, some leaving in tears, others in silent defeat. Oliver rejected them all, not with tantrums, but with a wall of silence, a refusal to be touched, a constant turning of his back that seemed louder than any scream. And now, the 9th one was arriving. Her name was Grace Morgan. She didn't come with a fancy resume or letters of recommendation from top agencies. Instead, she walked into the house with calm eyes, a small suitcase, and a quiet kind of strength that didn't need to be announced. The housekeeper tried to warn her, said Oliver didn't speak, didn't engage, didn't want anyone near him. Grace just nodded. She'd heard worse. She had worked with troubled children before, each with their own wounds and walls. What she didn't expect was the tension that lived in every corner of the house. Not the kind made of arguments or noise, but the kind made of absence, of things unsaid. Vincent greeted her with a handshake that barely lasted a second and gave her a short briefing like he was reading from a list. Oliver doesn't talk. He doesn't want help. Don't push him. Then he disappeared into his office like always. Grace was left standing in the hallway, staring at the closed door of the boy who apparently had broken 8 adults before her. When Grace walked into Oliver's room for the first time, it wasn't at all what she imagined. It wasn't neat or sad. It was messy, not wild, just lived in. There were toys on the floor, little plastic dinosaurs lying on their sides, puzzle pieces under the table, and open jars of paint near the window, some still wet. A sketchbook had been tossed aside, pages smudged with tiny fingerprints and brush strokes. She didn't say anything. She didn't scold him or compliment the drawings. She just stepped in carefully, as if walking into someone's private world, and bent down to pick up a red plastic truck. Oliver was in the corner, sitting in his wheelchair, eyes watching every move without saying a word. Grace held up the truck and smiled. "You left your army behind," she said lightly. No response, no smile, nothing, but no screaming either, no turning away. She set the truck on the shelf and then picked up a cloth from a basket nearby. She walked over to the paint-stained floor, looked at the boy and said, "You made the mess. I'll help clean it." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a lecture. It was just a fact. Oliver stared at her, his expression unreadable. He had done this dance 8 times before. New face, new voice. They all came in smiling, pretending everything was fine, asking too many questions, trying too hard. But not this one. She didn't ask anything. She didn't push a toy into his hand or kneel beside him with a fake, cheerful tone. She didn't even ask about the paintings. She just sat on the floor, wiping off blue paint from the tiles. Oliver watched her, unsure whether she was foolish or different. Part of him waited for her to say something awkward or annoying, but she didn't. She just kept cleaning, humming softly under her breath. It wasn't a song he knew, but it wasn't meant for him anyway. It was like she was just existing in the same space as him, not trying to invade it. That, more than anything, made him pause, maybe even listen. The silence between them didn't feel heavy like it usually did. It felt curious. That was new. Oliver didn't look away like he usually did. He watched her hands, how she wiped, how she folded the cloth neatly, how she didn't make a big deal about anything. He still didn't speak, of course, still didn't smile. But when she reached for the sketchbook, she didn't open it. She just placed it gently back on the desk. That small gesture felt like respect, and Oliver noticed. Most grown-ups thought they needed to see everything, comment on everything, fix everything. Grace didn't. She just let things be. Grace didn't try to impress Oliver. She didn't arrive every morning with a plan or a bag full of new ideas. Instead, she just showed up, calm, steady, and patient. She brought small things, 2 slices of bread, a bit of cheese, and sometimes a slice of tomato. Sandwich time, she'd say, placing a small plate next to Oliver without waiting for approval. At first, Oliver didn't touch the food. He would glance at it, then look away, pretending not to care. But Grace never insisted. She just sat nearby, eating her own sandwich, talking to herself like she didn't mind the silence. Slowly, Oliver's curiosity grew. One day, he took a bite. Grace didn't celebrate. She didn't even look at him. She just kept chewing like it was no big deal. And somehow, that made it easier for Oliver to keep eating. There was no pressure, no spotlight, just a moment shared between 2 people who didn't need to explain anything. As the days passed, Grace added other small things. A deck of cards appeared on the table one afternoon. She shuffled slowly, clumsily on purpose, letting a few fall on the floor. "Oops, I'm terrible at this," she joked. Oliver watched her quietly. She played alone, mumbling to herself, making little jokes like, "You'd beat me if you played, I just know it." The next day, she left the cards on the edge of his desk. She didn't say a word. The day after that, she placed them in his lap. That time, Oliver picked them up. Not to play, not yet. But he didn't throw them away either. Progress. Grace smiled to herself, never letting Oliver see. Her rhythm never changed. She didn't rush. She didn't expect anything big. Every moment was small on purpose. Games that didn't need legs. Conversations that didn't need answers. Snacks that didn't need thank yous. She gave Oliver space without leaving him alone, and that changed everything. Then came the jokes. Simple ones. Bad ones even. "Why did the banana go to the doctor?" she'd asked out of nowhere. Oliver stared at her blankly. "Because it wasn't peeling well," she finished, shaking her head at her own joke. Silence. No smile, no eye contact. She did it again the next day. A chicken crossing the road, a cow with no legs. Nothing worked until it did. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet as always, and Grace was mid-joke when Oliver's lips twitched, just slightly, a small movement, easy to miss. But Grace saw it. She didn't say anything. She didn't react. The joke wasn't even funny. But Oliver had heard it enough times that maybe it wore him down. Or maybe it was the way she delivered it, not caring if he laughed or not. That day he didn't just listen. He smirked, the smallest smile, gone in a second. But it was there. Grace looked away like she hadn't noticed. But inside, something warm grew fast. That same week, something else changed. Oliver started choosing where he wanted to sit during the day. Sometimes he stayed near the window, other times near the living room where Grace usually sat. He didn't speak, but he pointed, and when Grace followed his direction, he didn't roll his eyes or look annoyed. He just watched. Sometimes he let her shuffle cards in front of him. Sometimes he let her lose on purpose, and sometimes, not often, he let out a sound, not a word, not a laugh, but a sound, a soft exhale that almost sounded like one. Grace kept showing up every day, and every day Oliver let her stay a little longer. One afternoon she placed the cards on the floor. Oliver looked at them, then at her. She sat down cross-legged and waited. After a long pause, he slowly rolled his chair closer. It wasn't a big move, but it was enough to sit beside her. Without a word, Grace dealt the cards, and he stayed. That same evening, Vincent came home earlier than usual. He had been avoiding it. The house didn't feel like a home anymore, just a reminder of what was lost. He often stayed at work longer than needed, not because he was busy, but because it was easier. That day he walked through the door expecting silence, maybe a few footsteps from the staff and the usual ache in his chest, but instead he heard something he hadn't heard in a long time. Laughter, not loud, not constant, but real. He froze near the hallway, confused. He followed the sound slowly and stopped at the edge of the living room. On the floor, Grace and Oliver sat playing cards. Oliver's chair was nearby, but he had chosen the floor for the game. His legs still didn't move, but he was leaning forward, smiling. Really smiling. Grace was laughing too, rubbing her forehead like she had just lost. The warmth of the moment hit Vincent like a punch to the chest. Something inside him cracked and stitched back together at the same time. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching. That smile, Oliver's smile, was something he hadn't seen in so long he had almost forgotten what it looked like. Part of him wanted to run into the room, hug his son, say something, anything, but another part held back. Fear, guilt. What if this was temporary? What if getting close again would only lead to more heartbreak? So he stayed quiet, watching, hoping, afraid. Grace glanced up and saw him. She didn't say anything. She just gave him a small nod and kept playing. Oliver didn't notice. He was too focused on the game. And Vincent, for the first time in a long while, let himself breathe. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in months, he felt something real. Hope. 6 months had passed. It wasn't a miracle, and it wasn't fast, but it was real. Oliver now walked short distances with help. He didn't move like he used to, and sometimes the pain showed on his face when he tried too hard. But he walked. His chair was still there, always nearby, always ready for the longer walks or the days his legs refused to cooperate. But the chair no longer defined him. It was just a tool now, not a sentence. What defined him were the steps he took each day, even the wobbly ones. The house, once filled with silence and tension, now had a rhythm again. Not perfect, not loud, but steady. The change didn't stop with Oliver. Vincent was different too. He still worked long hours, still carried the seriousness of a man used to control and pressure. But now he came home earlier. He stayed for dinner. He sat in the living room more. And most surprisingly, the piano in the corner, untouched for years, had music again. One afternoon, while Grace helped Oliver put his sneakers on before their walk, he looked at her with a thoughtful expression. He'd been quiet all morning, not in a bad mood, just thinking. Then out of nowhere he asked, "Do you have to be born from someone to be their mom?" Grace blinked, surprised by the question. She paused, sitting back slightly. Oliver looked up at her, not anxious, just curious. It wasn't about labels, it was about connection. Grace smiled, the kind of soft smile that holds more weight than 1,000 words, and said, "No, Oliver, you just have to stay." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He wrapped his arms around her in a calm, slow hug and stayed there, holding on. And that was it. That was the moment. No one clapped. No one made a grand statement, but something settled in the air, a shared understanding. She had stayed through the silence, through the anger, through the healing, through the noise of others and the doubts within. She stayed when it was hard, and she stayed when it mattered most. And now it wasn't just Oliver who knew. Vincent stood by the doorway, watching them with his hands in his pockets and something quiet in his eyes. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to, because in that room, in that second, everyone knew. Grace wasn't just the woman who came to help. She was the one who never left. And now she wasn't going anywhere. She stayed for good.